right, welcome to another episode of Piecing It Together, the podcast where we take a look at a new movie and try to figure out what movies inspired it. And today on the show, we are talking about Between the Temples. This is a new movie that just came out starring Jason Schwartzman and Kane from writer-director Nathan Silver and is very Jewy. And I am lucky enough to have a rabbi as my guest for this episode, Lex Rofeberg from Judaism Unbound. We get into a lot of great puzzle pieces, as well as lots of tangents about a lot of stuff that goes on in this movie that, quite frankly, I probably wouldn't have been able to pick up on as a, just regular Jew. So it was great having Lex on the show. That conversation is coming up in a moment. Before we get to it, I do want to remind you, as always, to make sure you are subscribed to Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. You can follow us on social media at PiecingPod. And don't forget to join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces, where we continue the conversation about all the movies we talk about here on the show. So with that said, let's talk about Between the Temples. All right, we are going to get into Between the Temples, and joining me, we've got Lex Rofeberg. Lex, thank you so much for being here.
Very, very excited. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Whenever I have guests on, it's like, I'm a film critic, I'm a filmmaker, I'm just a general film fan. I don't always have someone who is just so perfect to talk about the particular movie we're going to talk about, but having someone who is, I guess, would a Jewish scholar be appropriate?
Oh, wow.
Rabbi?
Yeah, I'll take it. I'll take it. I'm at the very least, I'm a Jew. At the second least, I am also a rabbi. And I co-host a Jewish podcast of my own. Judaism Unbound is what it's called. And I spend a lot of time thinking about pop culture. That's not what I do professionally, but I'm super, super jazzed to dive into some Jewish film, and in this case, one particular one, and it's related past Jewish films.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's going to be a lot of directions to go with this one, and we'll get a lot of Jewiness in there, but a lot of other stuff too, I think. So there's going to be a lot of directions to go.
True.
But with that said, before we start getting to the puzzle pieces thing, was this a movie you were aware of ahead of time? Because I feel like this movie, at least for me, just kind of dropped out of nowhere. Like I wasn't particularly familiar with Nathan Silver, but of course I'm a big fan of Jason Schwartzman, and I got this screener and I was just like, oh, I'm always down to see Jason Schwartzman, especially in kind of depressed Jason Schwartzman mode. I'm like, especially in, and this just kind of popped up out of nowhere for me.
Yeah, I mean, so the answer is yes, I had heard of it, not a ton, but through, I don't know, the funny little back world of, it's not really Jewish film discourse, it's more just like Jewish discourse generally, and there's like a certain corner that looks for films to yell at each other about, usually about whether there were good representational choices made with actors, and a bunch of, candidly, I'm like sick of that set of conversations, and this movie is not really likely to make that conversation open up so much. It's opening up many others. But yeah, I mean, I think that it was seen as this sort of off the beaten path film, but then for a certain corner of American Jewish life, it was like, oh wow, this is really like literally featuring people chanting Torah and like excerpts of a Shabbat service. Like, this is not just like, oh, we've got a movie with some Jewish side themes. This is like, we're going there.
Yeah, it's thick. They lay it on pretty damn thick, and it's I think really well done. But I think that's a good place to start jumping in. What do you have for your first puzzle piece here for Between the Temples?
My first puzzle piece. Oh, so I have many pieces. I didn't think about like which is the primary and secondary and tertiary, but I'm going to do it in real time. They're not
in any order.
I'm
they're wherever they go.
No, so I'm going to generate the true, authentic, correct order. I appreciate you being kind to me, but I'm gonna absolutely knock it out of the park. Life is an improv game. Here we go. Okay, so the first one I'm going to start with, I actually haven't seen, but I feel like I need to bring it in because it's very clear that this film had a major influence on Between the Temples, and that is Harold and Maude. So I have a number of people in my life who, when they read the description of Between the Temples, we're going to talk a lot about whether it's a love story or not, I figure.
Sure.
But this connection in a way that isn't just a typical friendship between somebody who is a younger man and an older woman, and both, in this case, both are Jewish. In the Harold and Maude case, it's not as entirely critical to the film, the Jewishness, but like literally there's a tattoo on the older woman's arm that indicates she was a Holocaust survivor. It's very clear that Between the Temples seems to be consciously riffing on that. And so I feel like that's got to be a starting point for us, is the, early 70s movie Harold and Maude.
Yeah, 100%. It was one that I was going to bring up as well. And I think I haven't seen it in many, many years, but if I remember correctly, we are introduced to Harold kind of like feigning a suicide attempt, very much like Jason Schwartzman here laying down in the middle of the road. I think that has to be very 100%, on purpose there. And yeah, the central relationship here, whether it's romantic or not, depending on how you look at it, is certainly inspired by that, from the age gap, from the kind of strange relationship, as it were. There's so many different ways that the two of them kind of connect really well. So definitely, I think it's a smart one to start this with. I think you're absolutely right. If we are going in some form of order, it's a good place to start. So I guess I'll start with a very obvious one as well, and go with A Serious Man.
That's probably on my list too.
Nice. The Coen brothers' most Jewish movie, probably. As far as the central questions of both movies, very much the question is questioning everything. What does it all mean? Once that question comes up, where does the next question go? One of my favorite lines ever in A Serious Man is when the one other teacher, I think it was another teacher, it might have been one of the parents, says, "Please accept the mystery about the stolen homework." That kind of line that just, it makes you think, and it makes you go down a rabbit hole, and like it's a very Jewish line of thinking, and of course everything being centered around Jewishness and Judaism. And I think the Coen brothers, it runs through a lot of their other films, but it's never been quite as thick as it is with The Serious Man. And I'll just throw in as like a little bonus side piece, The Big Lebowski.
I was just going to say, I would actually push you. A Serious Man is the most straightforwardly Jewish of the Coen brothers movies. I am actually kind of notorious. People presume I'm like a big A Serious Man guy. Eric Langberg, who I know is a past guest and is my own brother-in-law, he loves A Serious Man. I like A Serious Man, but it's not like my favorite movie ever. And I did have a similar, I actually feel similar about Between the Temples and A Serious Man. Like, I like both of them a lot. Neither is like knocking it out of the park, but what they share is a really explicit anchoring in like not only Jewishness or Judaism, but like actually at synagogues and like prominent rabbi characters. And the biggest hyperlink that made me like, this has to be a puzzle piece, is that literally both involve scenes where there's somebody getting high and a bar mitzvah involved. So like there's directly in A Serious Man, this kid who's having his bar mitzvah and he's high during his own ceremony. And then in Between the and I don't know what the spoilers situation is. I'm assuming we can spoil things. But in Between the Temples, there's a scene where accidentally Ben, right? Yeah, Jason Schwartzman's character. He gets high without realizing it on like Carla's tea, and then he like envisions his own younger self. I mean, he's watching a video of the bar mitzvah, but then it like comes to life. So I think that was on purpose. Like I got a sense that Nathan Silver was making certain Jewish film shout outs on purpose. Like it could just be that it's similar themes, or we could be like, okay, we're talking about the specific situation of somebody getting high related to a bar mitzvah. That's not an accident.
Right. Absolutely. I think you're definitely right there. And then, just to bring it back to The Big Lebowski, Jason Schwartzman's character, Ben, doesn't even like really know what to order when he ends up at the bar. And the bartender suggests mudslides. And I feel like that's a similar drink to a White Russian. So that's why I wanted to bring that in. But you could certainly get a lot of other Coney stuff.
And they both, even forgetting the specifics of the drink, it's like they both have a drink come up at a couple of random times throughout the movie. And also like the bartender in Between the Temples, he's like the bartender at a place in an opening scene and then in a totally different place later. It's almost like he's I don't want to get too like, oh, there's secret mystical conversations. Like, is it an angel that's coming up? Like, I don't want to be that ridiculous, but it is interesting that you've got this character popping up multiple times. And in the first case at the bar, he's wearing a shirt with the name Ezra Furman on it, who is like a pop star, a rocker. Like she's a trans Jewish rocker who very explicitly builds Jewish themes underneath her work. Little Jewish Easter egg, Afikomen, whatever we want to call it for the Jews out there.
Love it. To that point, a little bit of a tangent. Am I right in saying the actress who plays the rabbi's daughter, who Ben is kind of interested in, is the same actress as his wife in the flashbacks, the dead wife?
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's a purposeful,
that's a really interesting thing to do, and kind of lays into the somewhat surreal aspects of this film. It doesn't like lay it on too thick, but there are certainly moments like that, and that kind of leans into like the drug sequence that you were just talking about. So
right, and she herself, like, it's the actress who is playing both characters. Like, she's the voice of the deceased wife, but then she in the movie, like in like a sex act, sort of inhabits the deceased ex-wife. It's like a many-layered situation there.
Absolutely. Well, let's go to another piece. What do you got next?
One more thing on A Serious Man that connects, because there are deep things that both of those movies are doing that are actually what I would term drosh. Like, this is where the rabbi piece of me comes in. Like, there are movies with Jewish themes, and then there's movies that seem to be consciously playing on traditional Jewish text. And these two movies share that. A Serious Man is very much working from the book of Job, and the book of Job being a classic story in the Bible of a main character who, basically he's sort of a righteous, good guy, but all these terrible things happen to him, and then you open up questions of why do good things happen to good people. That's very much what A Serious Man is doing. And Between the Temples, it is totally a commentary on the book of Leviticus, and specifically on a centerpiece of Leviticus that is very well known, not just to Jews, but otherwise, because Jesus quotes it in the New Testament, the notion of love your neighbor as yourself, and in Hebrew, ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. And the relationship that Ben and Carla have seems to be pretty consciously like a meditation on what it means to love your neighbor. And there's even like the verses. The reason why I feel confident that they're doing this on purpose is because the 4 verses that she chants in her Torah reading are those precise verses in Leviticus chapter 19 that there's a lot of famous quotes there that even people who aren't religious would have heard of, like, don't stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. This movie starts with Carla reconnecting with Ben because he like gets in a fight at a bar, and she is like she's deciding not to stand by the blood of her neighbor. And then in the classroom where Ben is teaching very like monotonely and not so well to the Sunday school kids, they're having a conversation about what does the word neighbor mean in the book of Leviticus. Does it mean your literal neighbor next door? Does it mean your friend? Does it mean Jews? Does it mean non-Jews? And then we learn that Carla is herself actually in this murky place where she identifies as Jewish, but by certain notions of Jewish law, she would not be Jewish. So like, I think they did a magnificent job of building in that text of Leviticus, which Leviticus gets a very bad rap for many good reasons, including the very chapter before this being used in all sorts of homophobic ways. But that's another way that A Serious Man and Between the Temples are doing parallel work.
Well, you know what? The Bible has been mentioned as a puzzle piece before. The book of Leviticus, let's just put that on the list here.
Sweet.
Might as well.
So books are in play.
Yeah, books are in play. Sure,
okay,
I probably haven't read them, but they're in play. So, absolutely. And I will say also, to your point there, if there's one central theme of the whole movie, it's connection. And so a lot of what you're saying there with the book of Leviticus is absolutely makes sense with that. So let's go to another piece. So what do you got next?
Yeah, I want to go. There's a famous Clickhole article in my circles that's called "Only Some People Are Jewish," and it's just like a joke about how not everything in the universe is Jewish. So I wanna go in other directions for a second, and I want to go to like a quintessentially I mean, it's not Jewish at all in like a direct sense, but I think Banshees of Inisherin, there's actually some really interesting parallels here. I mean, they're different tonally, although I think both have a lot of layers of darkness and tragedy. I think Banshees, if we were having the Harold and Maude conversation, it's like they're equally dark.
Sure.
Between the Temples is not quite as dark, but the movie spending a huge amount of time wading into the questions of like, what is friendship? And not just, I mean, for me, I'll put my cards on the table. I do not watch this movie as the two main characters having a romantic connection. I especially don't think Carla sees him that way. I especially think the end of the movie suggests that she is like entering her teacher mode that they initially met in, and she's like being kind to him and trying to like sort of handhold him through this phase of thinking he's in love with her.
Sure.
So I read this as a meditation on friendship and not really a meditation on romance. And so not that like rom-coms are not a big part of how I would puzzle piece this. I think somebody else could have a bunch of, you could bring in When Harry Met Sally. You could bring in a lot of things. But like for me, Banshees, I don't know if people call it Banshees for short. That's what I'm going to do.
I think we can.
Like I think that it is similar, and to get back to the Jewish a little in like an opposite, like the way that it is so baked into Irishness.
Sure.
It feels like a similar situation to how we're really leaning into a certain kind of American Jewishness here. Like Banshees doesn't work, like it is not a side afterthought, like the ethnic background of the characters in either of those movies.
Yeah, and it's also not worried about whether or not the person watching is going to be able to connect with all of that, either Irishness or Jewishness in this case. It's laying it out there, and if it works for you, it works for you. And but yeah, I mean, just to bring it back to connection, I think that is such a central theme of the Banshees of Inisherin. So I think that's a great one to bring up. I'm going to stay in that mode, actually, and go with a little bit smaller film called Seven Chinese Brothers that stars Jason Schwartzman. This is a film from an indie director, Bob Byington, whose films I really love. And Schwartzman is the main star of it, and he is this character who is so obviously depressed and aimless and just doesn't know what to do with himself. And the thing that is just so, to me, perfect about it is that the character doesn't really grow. He just simply allows a little bit of connection into his life. And I mean, that kind of, like I was saying, it fits right in with what's going on with Banshees of Inisherin. It fits in really well here with Ben's journey in between the temples. I think the idea that, you know, a movie doesn't have to show beginning to end such huge growth. It could just be like a little bit of a step in the right direction. And of course, you know, Schwartzman being the main star of it, you know, made me think of it. And I think it's just a movie more people should check out.
Nice. Yeah, I should check it out myself. That sounds like a totally cool connection. Right
on. Well, let's go to another one. What do you got next?
So, I mean, I'll do a Jewish one, then go back to an only some people are Jewish one.
Sure.
Shiva Baby, I think needs to be in the conversation for a bunch of reasons. That's another one where I felt like, and this is, I'm not saying there was plagiarism. I want to be clear. Like, I think that there's a certain corner of Jewish life, but it's a pretty big corner that really encounters the cinematic pieces that are really Jewy as like sort of an ongoing commentary on themselves. There's like a way in which a certain group of people, they want to talk about the producers and talk about the Marx Brothers and talk about the Shiva Babies of the world and talk about like Yentl and talk about, like, there's like a set of these movies that are just like floating around almost in like an MCU, but it's, if it were Jewish.
the JCU. Yeah,
yes, exactly. I do have an MCU one coming up that's going to be surprising. But I think Shiva Baby, genre-wise, they're both comedies, I think. Like, you could argue about the genres of these movies. Like, they're both comedies, but very suspenseful and also have significant cringe factors.
Oh, yeah.
The cringe specifically surrounds, like, familial Jewish interactions in home context. So Shiva Baby, almost the entire thing takes place at a Shiva, which is it's an occasion for gathering in the first 7 days after someone has died. And like that sort of captures it, but Shivas are also notoriously like full of drama. Like even though it's like a funny particular Jewish thing, and Shiva Baby plays with that. And similarly, like Shabbat dinner plays a key role in Between the Temples, and the big scene that comes at the end, it actually kind of shocked me. I was not ready for it. Really, like, I don't know, it turns things up to an 11 on the volume dial. And similar to Shiva Baby, there are just some cringes in your body, and some like unreal sexual dynamics, and also just a lot of yelling and overlapping in a Jewish conversational manner that reminded me of Shiva Baby.
No, 100%. That's another one that I was thinking about bringing up. And I feel like lately in the pop culture discourse, when a movie has that kind of Jewish energy, it's an anxiety. And Shiva Baby is like kind of that, and Uncut Gems. I don't know if you're going to bring that up at any point.
I wasn't, but that's a good one.
Those are the two of the last like 5 years that I think really capture that really well. And one thing, you're talking about all of like the overlapping voices and all that stuff. Got to give a shout out to that squeaky door, which makes its big payoff appearance during that dinner sequence. And I was dying at that when that was almost like the release valve there, when that door squeaked its loudest. That's just a really great work of sound design. And definitely fits into all that. So great one there.
And I want to give a shout. I want to give a shout to Ben's two moms, who I think in that scene and also throughout the movie do a really good job. I'm not looking at the actresses' names, but I think Carolin Aaron. She's because she's like making a lot of money as a mom of prominent Jews. Like that's her thing lately, because she is on Marvelous Mrs. Maisel in a similar context. And I thought the acting and the writing for DeLeon's character, who converted to Judaism, they didn't quite say that until the very end, which I actually liked. They did a very good job of not making that the butt of the joke. There's been a problem with a lot of convert characters in Jewish movies, where there's this thing of making them like almost way over the top into Judaism, and everybody else is like, why are you so into this? I was born Jewish. And you like, she is like on the board of the synagogue, so I was nervous that they were going to go that direction, but I thought that it was a much more like mature, well-rounded character, and I thought she did a good job with it. And in that scene, the reactions that the two of them have to what's happening, because they wanted to set up Ben in the first place with Madeline Weinstein's character.
Gabby.
And they're like in real time trying to process, and I thought they were like scene stealers there.
Yeah. They were both really, really good. And I think that's a really good point. I think you're right. A lot of converted Jews in movies tend to be like really over the top like that. I feel like that's a thing in just in general. I think that's kind of what people think of converted Jews, so it just carries over. But
and they did have some, like, to be clear, they still had a couple moments where it was like she was giving a little talk to the congregation because she was on the board. They were doing this fundraiser for a Holocaust Torah. Eric, when he was watching, he had to send me a note like, what's a Holocaust Torah? What is that? And I was like, that's one of those things that a lot of Jews take. It's one of those moments where like trauma is so normal that you don't even think about it. But like a lot of synagogues have in their arks, like in their holy whatever cupboards, I guess, a Torah that was once in Europe in a community and then was like rescued during the Holocaust. A lot of Torahs were, and so this was like, I don't know if it was a restoration effort because it was partially damaged and they were trying to fix it. Like there was basically a fundraiser to try and either restore the Torah or get one to their community, something like that. And and she gets up and she does this whole thing, and like randomly out of nowhere, she's like, "And my heart is with Israel." And I was like, some people could watch this movie and be like, "Oh, this is so disrespectful. It's making Jewish communities look like unrealistically into Israel." And I was like, "No, I think it's pretty realistic. Like I've seen a lot of speeches like that."
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I will go with another one here. I'm going to go with a movie called To Dust, which another movie that I feel like not enough people have seen. But this stars Matthew Broderick and Giza Rohrig, and a very dark but very funny, darkly humorous movie about a religious Jewish man who's grappling with the death of his wife, and he seeks out a school professor to kind of help him deal with the scientific version of what might be happening to his wife's body, because from the point of view of religion, he's just not getting the answers that he needs. And, obviously based on that description, it goes in different directions, but it's also very funny and very, a lot of that Jewish anxiety and all that. Yeah. But it is a movie, though, that is dealing with somebody who just isn't getting the answers from their spirituality. And that is something that really, I think, kind of ties these two movies together really well. And it's a fantastic movie. And just that idea of the grief, but then the guilt that comes from religion not being enough to deal with that grief. And then that just turns into a cycle and sends somebody spiraling. I think that that's something that really connects the two main characters here.
Nice.
So it's definitely a movie. If you haven't seen it, I would very highly recommend it.
Cool. That's a really cool one. I wish I had seen it. Yeah, that one is going straight to the top of my watch list.
Right on.
I have a couple more. I think like a brief shout to Keeping the Faith, just because it's another movie with like a clergy. Ben Stiller plays the rabbi, and I think. I don't think Keeping the Faith is an amazing movie. And as somebody who myself is in an interfaith relationship, and like I struggle with how they do the interfaith relationship in that movie that sort of turns into a Jewish relationship at the end because she converts. But like they're both trying to do to do a movie that gives you a window into rabbis, or into, in this case, a cantor. That's like not just sort of the caricature that you get in a lot of movies. I just read a blog post by a friend of mine about he was just thinking about cantors in movies throughout history, and he talked about how in a lot of them they're furniture. He called them sacred furniture, and I was like, that's right. Like they're basically there to be backdrop for whatever journey it's usually like somebody who's like secular Jewish, but like figuring out what their relationship is to God or Judaism. And then like the cantor is there for 4 seconds singing something in a not particularly relatable way in a synagogue. And I liked that this was different. And I think Keeping the Faith does a good job also of like humanizing clergy and not having them be just like 75-year-old white dudes. I guess in this case it's still white dudes, but
sure, absolutely. Whenever I think of Keeping the Faith, I always think of when I was going through all my DVDs and seeing like which ones I want to get rid of. And I came to Keeping the Faith. I was like, did I really like this movie enough to buy this? Like, that's a random movie.
Yeah, like I don't think it's bad, to be clear. It's just like, it's a thing. It exists.
Yeah. No, it was
another
fun.
one I thought about that like hyperlinks to this, but I actually think is bad. It was that Jonah Hill, was it Lauren London? Like the movie that came out like a year or two ago on Netflix.
Oh, I hated that movie.
It was so bad,
Yeah.
but it had some similar scenes of cringe, like parent to Jewish child relationship things. I didn't. That was really not a worthwhile use of time, but it certainly is related.
Absolutely. Well, I realized my last two puzzle pieces, I didn't realize I lined them up this way, but they both star Jason Schwartzman, so I might as well just combine them into one last piece here. You got a little bit of Asteroid City here because the most recent Wes Anderson film starring Jason Schwartzman did have him as somebody who is in this existential rut because of the death of his wife. So, you obviously have a similar setup there. And then, of course, it goes in very different Wes Anderson-y directions. But then also I Heart Huckabees. From David O. Russell. I love that movie so much. Probably my favorite David O. Russell movie. And, as far as these issues of just the big questions. We talked about it with The Serious Man. We talked about it, I think, with a couple of our other pieces along the way here. But just the big, what does it all mean questions? And then really when it comes down to it, the answer is you just need to connect with other people. I think I.R. Huckabees does a great job of showing just how kind of ridiculous it can get if you don't look at the simple answers, which is really what it's all about here with Between the Temples.
Yeah, that's a great one. Yeah, you're better at thinking about like the actor connections. That's a really good one. I have a couple more that are gonna be a little bit out of left field maybe, and so that might make them fun.
Sure.
So one's not that far out of left field. One, Carol Kane is in, so I'm like following your lead on the actor hyperlinks. Nobody says hyperlink anymore. That's my term for intertext.
It works.
So Hester Street. This is a movie that for that corner of like Jewish pop culture obsessies like me, Hester Street, it's all about, I mean, it's the name of a street in the Lower East Side of Manhattan that this movie dives into the Ashkenazi, the East European Jewish immigrant experience, and Carol Kane is in it. And for a lot of people, seeing her in this movie, again, there's this cinematic universe of deeply Jewish movies over time, and having somebody transcend literally like 5 decades of that story in and of itself is a gift. And so I think you got to bring in Hester Street. The other thing I wanted to bring in, Dirty Dancing. Dirty Dancing. It's not okay. So like there are things about it that are not at all related to this movie, but I wanted to name some geography things, because one piece of this movie that was very important to me personally was its geographic context. It's New York, but it's very much not New York City. It was filmed in Kingston, New York. It's in like the Hudson Valley near like the Catskills, and Carla, Carol Kane's character, she references that she's a red diaper baby. That she comes from like socialist family, but I'm a red diaper grandbaby. My grandfather and grandmother, and my own mom, she grew up in the Catskills in a town called Woodburn, very close to where this was filmed, and she was very much part of like a super duper secularist Jewish family, but like really Jewish, right? Like in the way that Carol Kane is. Like when you hear Carol Kane in a movie and you learn her character is Carla O'Connor, you're like, well, I think there's going to be more to it than that, because I don't
here.
like even if your family was mostly secular, which I think both in real life and in this movie is the case. There's something quintessentially culturally Jewish there, and that geographic context has a lot of importance to Jewish history. I mentioned Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. It comes up because like there's a whole season of Marvelous Mrs. Maisel that takes place in the Catskills because she's going to do comedy there. It's this area where a lot of folks from New York City like would go on vacation, and Dirty Dancing takes place at one such like summer trip. That it's always so funny because some people watch that movie and they're like, that's the most Jewish movie I've ever seen. And other people watch it and they're like, oh, that was about Jews? I had no idea that was about Jews. Because it was from a different time period of cinema where a lot of the time you would make the Jewish references stealth for the people who would get it. And that's not the case here. But I think, like, I almost feel like Carla, like she grew up working at one of the, she wasn't going because she wasn't living in New York City and part of the bougie folks like vacationing up, but she might have lived in the neighborhood and like worked at one of those places and hung out with all those people. So Dirty Dancing. And then my wild card last one is Thor Ragnarok. Thor Ragnarok. I think in a way that people aren't fully soaking in, and I have evidence for this because Madeline Weinstein, I don't know if it's Weinstein or Weinstein, but she has said this in some interviews, that she is really interested in the concept in Yiddish of Doigkeit, which means like here-ness. And that for her, this movie is a thought experiment or a meditation on here-ness, which is to say the notion of Doigkeit historically has been held by a lot of people who are quote unquote like diasporist. People who are not so interested in a centralization of Jewishness in the land of Israel, but are more interested in the notion that wherever we are in the world, that is where Judaism can live. And this movie, you're starting to see where Thor and Ragnarok, I can see you nodding. You're seeing where it's coming. This movie does a lot with that. Now, it doesn't do like big picture conversations about diaspora, but the punchline in the movie, the way it ends, is that the culminating bat mitzvah that she has is, I'm going to say a Yiddish word, it's davka. It's specifically not at a synagogue. And it's important to the movie that it's not at a synagogue. And she seems like, yeah, I live out there. There's a scene where people try to convince her to move. She's like, no, I live in a different area that's kind of in the woods. And they have this ritual outside of a synagogue. And they find a little mini experience of sacredness in an unexpected place. And I bring in Thor Ragnarok because to me, of every movie that I've seen in recent years, that is the one most interested in questions of diaspora and homeland and exile. And it really ends with the notion that, no, Asgard is not just a place. Asgard is wherever we are as Asgardians. And I think that that's a notion that is being inhabited here, that, Jewishness, Judaism, it doesn't live at synagogue. It can live in our backyard if we decide to chant a few verses of Torah there.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. That is such a great way to kind of tie that all together. I love that. And it really is a question of, and it's something you see through a lot of these other movies too. Like it's a really great way to kind of tie a lot of this together, is that it really comes down to these particular people and the way that they engage personally with all of this stuff, not necessarily, temple, or it even comes back to the title of the movie, the Between the Temples. There's a lot of different ways to read that. I think that that's a really great way to wrap all of that stuff up. So some really great puzzle pieces along the way. I am going to read down our final list, and we'll get into some closing thoughts on Between the Temples. We talked about Harold and Maude, A Serious Man, The Big Lebowski. We threw the Book of Leviticus in there as well. The Banshees of Inisherin, Seven Chinese Brothers, Shiva Baby, To Dust, Keeping the Faith, Asteroid City, I Heart Huckabees, Hester Street, Dirty Dancing, and Thor Ragnarok. Yeah, lots of really interesting stuff in here. I don't know, anything that we didn't quite get to that you want to kind of talk about, we didn't get to while going through puzzle pieces here?
So because the Book of Leviticus got in and you said that books were okay, and I'm going to throw in I don't know, whatever Netflix is, TV, it's an Emmy nominated thing. I'm going to throw in Russian Doll as a last love of mine. I have been known to proclaim publicly that Natasha Lyonne is my rabbi. I stand by that. I think Russian Doll is a form of Jewish text in every sense it could be. And there's a specific moment where I saw these movies speaking to each other, where in Russian Doll season 2, there's a scene where she ends up like almost psychedelically or mystically in a yeshiva, in a classroom, and there's a blackboard behind her. And I had the chutzpah to pause and like zoom in and see what was on the blackboard. And it was the story of Korach from the Book of Numbers. And it was this story where a bunch of rebels against Moses are sort of swallowed up by the earth. And then shortly after that, she and the other core character sort of, in a sense, get swallowed up by the earth. They don't like talk about that, but it was on the blackboard behind them. And in this movie, in Between the Temples, there's that scene at the beginning, which I think is really important to the movie, of the kids in the Sunday school talking about what's a neighbor. And there's actually like a chart behind them with different categories of what neighbor might mean. And I think that we are meant to be sitting with that. We're even meant to be thinking about what it is to be a friend or a loved one. The song Yedid Nefesh that he stumbles through, that he literally can't sing, it means soulmate. Yedid is like beloved or mate or friend. Nefesh is usually translated soul. It's soulmate, but what's beautiful about it is, and I don't know if this was intentional, but it's a phrase that can mean like a romantic loved one, but it can also mean just like a deep kind of friendship. Yedid is not the word for like love, but it can be taken that way. And so I really think that Russian Doll and Between the Temples are making some beautiful, I don't know if they're purposeful. I think with Natasha Lyonne they are. She's done a lot of like Jewish learning in traditional spaces.
Sure.
But even if here they're less intentional, they're there for us to take. And I think that there's something gorgeous in that little passing thing of he could have stumbled through any prayer in the Shabbat service, but it's the one that starts with the phrase soulmate. And that's beautiful.
That's really interesting. Absolutely. And I think that goes right back to like what we were talking about with the community aspect, with the connection aspect, and everything really with the main themes of this film. So that's a great little addition to throw in there. I was just going to add in just briefly, for anyone who hasn't seen this and just listened to us talk about it for 40 minutes, like obviously there's these themes involved, but it's also really funny. And there's a lot of like laugh out loud moments in this. I really loved Jason Schwartzman's relationship with his parents, and especially, his birth mom, who is, just he can do no wrong to her.
Yep.
Like I love that. I love the big giant menus at the restaurant they go to, which is like a great sight gag. Also the big dumb painting that she has in her foyer. There's a lot of really funny lines in here. And so, just knowing
Smigel.
that
We haven't given much love to the rabbi.
Yes.
He does a good job.
Rabbi Bruce, absolutely, who is just so excited to pawn his daughter off. Smigel is great.
Playing mini golf into a shofar.
God.
A traditional Rosh Hashanah proclamation of the new year. Yeah.
That was great. Oh my God, that's wonderful. Yeah, lots of really funny moments here. So definitely check the movie out. Lex, this was great. Is there another movie you watched recently you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
I will give two movies, each of which contain the number 2. So Inside Out 2.
Oh, nice.
I didn't include it as one of my connections. It is an incredible way of approaching anxiety in a kid-friendly way. I mean, I will tell you, I hold animated movies to a high standard, not a higher standard. Right as we speak, I'm actually wearing a shirt with Hey Arnold on it, one of my favorite TV shows ever, animated show. I love animated shows, but I think sometimes we just throw the latest Disney movies into automatically they were great zones. Inside Out, the first one, I thought was good. Mm-hmm. I think I might have liked Inside Out 2 better. I think that what they did with this, with the new emotions they brought in, and especially how anxiety played in, I thought it was a movie that was important for this moment. And I think they actually did a pretty good job. Not a perfect job, but it's worthwhile. And then the last movie I'll shout out is the movie I always shout out, which is D2 Mighty Ducks, which is my favorite movie of all time. We could go into all sorts of things on that front, but if you haven't rewatched that, I've watched it recently all the time because I make a point to go back and watch the Mighty Ducks movies whenever I can. So I'll give some love to D2 Mighty Ducks. Quack, quack.
Love it. Great choice there. And by the way, I will say, I was surprised in myself because I tend to bring up Charlie Kaufman a lot on this show. I did not bring up any Charlie Kaufman here. Have you seen Orion in the Dark?
No.
That's an animated movie co-written by Charlie Kaufman, and it's very much like Inside Out 2, except for with a little bit of extra Charlie Kaufman anxieties included. So I think if you're a fan of animated movies and all of those kind of vibes, definitely check it out. So, Lex, tell people where they can find you and your podcast and everything you're up to.
Yeah. First, feel free to email me with all the things you thought I'm wrong about. Lex@JudaismUnbound.com. That's the name of all the stuff I'm about to say. Judaism Unbound. We've got a podcast. I'm thinking that we'll probably put this in as a bonus episode on our feed. So thanks for the cross-pollination. JudaismUnbound.com. If you are interested in doing some learning, some unlearning through traditional Jewish text and less traditional Jewish text, we do a lot of the stuff like we're doing here. We've had folks, and Between the Temples actually sponsored our podcast for a couple episodes, and we're very proud and thrilled that was the case.
That's so cool.
So Judaism Unbound.
Right on. Well, Lex, thanks so much for doing the show. Maybe we'll get you back again sometime. It can be another Jewy movie, or it could be something totally different if you'd like.
Only some people are Jewish. I'm happy to do either.
Hi, this is Wax Trax Records here on 2909 South Decatur. We buy all your old 45s, your old albums, any type of music memorabilia. Also, we sell music memorabilia, albums, CDs, and a lot. Come on down to Wax Trax, 2909 South Decatur, or give me a call at 702-362-4300. Thank you very much.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed that conversation about Between the Temples. Thank you so much to Lex Rofeberg for being here to talk about it, and thank you to all of you for listening. If you're enjoying piecing it together, of course, make sure you're subscribed wherever it is that you're listening, and maybe drop us a little 5-star rating and review. That helps make sure that more people check out the show. Speaking of people checking out the show, there's just been so many new listeners to Piecing It Together recently, and I just want to say how happy I am about that and how much I appreciate you all being out there. Keep listening, keep sending in your puzzle pieces. If you think of a puzzle piece that we didn't bring up in the conversation for this episode or any other recent episode, send them in. I will read them on the next trailers episode, and I just love hearing from you all. So, yeah, thank you so much for being out there. You can follow us on social media at Piecing Pod, join the Facebook group Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces, and don't forget, we do have a Patreon, the Produced by David Rosen Patreon, where I post bonus and advanced content from Piecing It Together, from Awesome Movie Year, and from my music career. Lots of great stuff over there. Early access to episodes, video versions of some episodes, lots of great stuff. So check it out. It's patreon.com/bydavidrosen. Keep listening, but if you want to support the show, you could do that too. And yeah, I guess that's a good place to wrap it up. And whenever we cover a very, very Jewy movie like this one, I always like to dig back to my now defunct old Jewish comedy rap group from back in college, Fakakta, and I'm going to play a song from Fakakta to close us out today. This is Challah, If You Hear Me. Hope you enjoy it. We'll be back with more Piecing It Together real soon.
Hi!
Hi!
How are ya?
Honey, let me tell you, I've been better. I got this Fakakta pain in my back.
Yeah, Ethel. Come on, we gotta start the song now. Yo, I'm Jewish Dave.
Yo, it's MC Ethel. And we've got Avi D.O.G.
If you hear me,
bringing it to you on the ones and twos, baby.
If you hear me, holla.
Challa, if you spell it that way. This is what my people say till the break of day. When I break my mind, so Jewish Dave's gonna make you hotter, gonna make you holler.
We're F-A-C-O-C-K-T-A.
You can call me a schmuck because that's how I play.
I'm MC Ethel, the kosher kitty. We've got Avi D.O.G. and the Jewish ditty.
I'm a pity the fool that's too late to shoot.
You drink all the Manischewitz?
Man, that ain't cool.
We're going kosher on your ass now.
Ask us how you can break the bread, cause this is what she said. She said,
If you hear me, holla. If you hear me, holla. If you hear me, holla. If you hear me, holla.
holla back, player, this is what we do. Bust rhymes in the streets and in the temple too. It's just the life of a Jewish rapper with mad flow. And yeah, I do want some bacon on that potato. It's just my fate, yo, to rock the mic. All you sucker MCs, yo, can take a hike. Yo, I'm trying to find a chick to marry, cause the only curls in my hair are by Jerry.
I was a junior cantor when I was 10. I swore I'd never sing Hebrew again.
I went to Jew camp, they tried to make me play sports, but I was only interested in getting into girl shorts. We got IBDOG on the ones and twos. He's an orthodox gangster with attitude. We're moving straight to the top, even Mel Gibson can't stop us from making the bread. Cause she said,
If you hear me, holla. If you hear me, holla. If you hear me, holla. If you hear me, holla.
Challah is my favorite bread. If you give me Jewish rye instead, I'll have Jewish Dave kick you in the head. And you'll be dead. You gotta make French toast with challah. No other bread is worth $1. Don't give me white bread or whole wheat. Challah, baby, can't be beat.
If you hear me, holla. If you hear me, holla.
Challah, baby,
If you hear me, holla. If you hear me, holla.
If you hear me.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.